Do you hear that? A single crow circling above a pale green ranch house, its core bouncing off the foothills in the cold Colorado air. The wind here doesn't just whistle, it shoves, slipping under your collar, tugging at you as if to warn you, away. From the outside, this place is all American dream. Manicured lawn, crisp white trim, a family dog tied near the porch. But behind those walls, the most disturbing genetic mystery in modern psychiatry is just beginning to take root. You're listening to 102 Hours where stories don't just get told, they come alive in the dark. It's 1951 and you've stepped into the newly built Hidden Valley Road neighborhood in Colorado Springs. The Galvins, Donald and Mimi are the first family on the block. He's an Air Force man, straight-backed and buttoned up, with a pilot's habit of checking the horizon. She's warm, radiant, the type to host dinner parties with spotless china. At first glance, they are a magazine ad for post-war prosperity. But you probably won't survive this story with that picture intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to 102 Hours, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I like to see where the shadows reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let 102 Hours guide you into tonight's journey. You stand at the threshold of their home, where the smell of fresh paint hasn't yet been replaced by the lived-in sense of cooking, childhood, and other things. Mimi greets you with the kind of smile that feels rehearsed, but still genuine. Don nods once and gestures toward the wide living room sunlight pooling across brand new carpet. The first baby, Donald Jr., gurgles from a crib in the corner. It's easy to believe this is a place where nothing bad will ever happen, and yet, in the corners of the Galvin household, there's already an undercurrent. Dawn's career with the Air Force means frequent absences. Mimi fills the time with meticulous homemaking and a rigid household order clock set exactly. Curtains drawn at the same hour each night. There's comfort in that routine, but there's also a brittle edge, like glass stretched to thin. Colorado Springs in the early 50s is a boomtown of military families and new suburbs. The Cold War hums in the background, a constant reminder of invisible threats. In history, this was the same decade the CIA was quietly running MKUltra experiments, testing the limits of the human mind. Here, however, the Galvins' minds will be tested without any government prodding, just the unrelenting hand of biology from the street. You watch neighbors wave to Mimi as she pushes a stroller. Nobody suspects they are looking at the matriarch of what will become one of the most infamous families in psychiatric research. She looks the part of suburban perfection, and perfection is something she clings to with both hands. Inside, Don Jr. stares longer than most babies, not in the way of curiosity, but with an odd, unblinking focus that feels off. You dismiss it. Babies are strange sometimes, but it's the kind of detail that will later feel like a breadcrumb. Investigators still question whether these early, small oddities were the illness whispering decades before it screamed. By the time their second child, Jim, is born, the Galvin home hums with life. 2 cribs, tiny socks folded in perfect pairs, and a father who comes home in uniform smelling faintly of jet fuel. Yet, behind Mimi's eyes, there's a tension like she's already rehearsing for problems she can't name. The first winter here is harsh. Snow piles against the windows, muffling the outside world. Inside, you notice Don Jr. pacing the playroom, not crawling, but pacing in a toddler's awkward sway. It's strange, but the kind of strange no one writes down. Years later, in interviews, family members will recall moments like this, replaying them with the hindsight of diagnosis. There are evenings when the house feels too quiet. Dawn's away on assignment, and Mimi sits in her chair, knitting, the clock ticking loud enough to fill the air. She glances at the boys often, as though waiting for some signal only she can sense. You can't hear anything unusual, but you feel it, the heaviness of a story that hasn't yet decided how dark it wants to be in those moments. You almost wish you could step back outside into the freezing Colorado air, hear the crow again, and pretend you never walked through this door. But you stay, because something here is already in motion, and walking away won't stop it. The second crib arrives with barely enough time to dust off the first. You stand in the hallway as Mimi smooths the new blanket, her fingers lingering over each crease, as if this level of care can somehow guarantee safety. Outside, the wind rattles the thin aluminum mailbox, a reminder that Colorado Springs has a way of sneaking its voice into every room. Jim is quieter than Don Jr., more compliant, less prone to the strange, unblinking stares. At first glance, he seems to balance the energy in the house, but the pace of life here doesn't leave much room for balance. The Galvins are building a family on a military timetable, births arriving in neat intervals like check marks on a clipboard. Before Jim is out of diapers, a third baby, John, makes his entrance. Then, without pause, the fourth, Joe. You try to imagine the constant state of laundry, the noise, the tiny socks that vanish into the ether. In the early 1950s, America is in love with large families. Popular culture beams images of smiling mothers surrounded by rows of scrubbed, happy children. In that way, the Galvins aren't unusual except in their determination to keep expanding, no matter the strain. Mimi thrives on the attention it brings. People stop her in town, marveling at her patience. She beams back, never letting on that her patience has already been tested in small, unsettling ways. One afternoon, you watch Don Jr., now a toddler, hold a plastic soldier in his fist until his knuckles blanch. He isn't playing, just staring at it, eyes darting sideways when someone enters the room. Jim, barely able to walk, toddles over to take it. The explosion of screaming is instant, high-pitched enough to make the hair on your arms stand up. It's not a tantrum in the usual sense, it's sharper, edged with a kind of panic you can't quite name. Mimi handles it briskly, separating the boys and redirecting them to different corners of the room. She never lets her voice rise, but her jaw tightens in a way that tells you she's filing this moment away. Later, family members will wonder how many of these small flare-ups she witnessed before the pattern started to form in her mind. The boys grow, and so does the house's population. By the end of the decade, there are 6 Galvin children, still all boys. Their energy is constant, ricocheting off the walls like pinballs. Don Sr., home between Air Force assignments, tries to manage them with a mixture of discipline and mild detachment. He's a man who likes order, and the chaos of half a dozen children under one roof seems to push him toward his work rather than toward home. The neighborhood is still young then, full of other military families. Barbecues in backyards, kids riding bikes in loose packs, the smell of cut grass mingling with charcoal. But the Galvin boys carry a certain reputation, even early on, not troublemakers exactly, just intense. They play harder, argue louder, bruise easier. You notice parents giving them a little more space on the playground. It's around this time that one of the boys, John, maybe takes to disappearing for short stretches during the day. He's not running away, he just wanders. Mimi will find him sitting under the cottonwoods at the edge of the property, staring at nothing. She calls him back, and he comes, but with a reluctant slowness, as though the distance between them is more than just a few yards of grass. Investigators still question whether this quiet detachment was the earliest, most delicate thread in the family's unraveling. Historical records show that in the 50s, mental illness in children was rarely discussed openly, often dismissed as phases or quirks. The psychiatric field was more focused on institutional care for adults and had not yet turned its full attention to childhood indicators. In the Galvin household, this cultural silence meant that strange behaviors were noted but not discussed. Beyond the kitchen walls, then comes the 7th child in, another boy. You can almost hear the sigh of fate in that delivery room. By now, the house on Hidden Valley Road is stretched to its limits. Bedrooms are shared, the dining table groans under the weight of every meal, and the air is never quiet. Even at night, there's the shuffle of someone getting up, the murmur of voices in the hallway, and still, Mimi pushes forward. She wears her role-like armor, each new child a polished plate, protecting her from whatever crack might be forming. Underneath, she keeps the house spotless, the children fed, and the neighbors impressed. What you don't see, what she never shows, is how tightly she's gripping the idea that sheer willpower can hold back something she doesn't yet understand. The sun dips low over the mountains, casting the neighborhood in that strange, golden light that makes everything look like a photograph from a happier time. From the outside, the Galvins look like the picture of post-war American success. But inside, the air is shifting, just slightly, like the moment before a storm rolls over. The ridge. It starts small, so small you almost convince yourself you imagined it. A brief pause in conversation when Don Jr., now edging into adolescence, tilts his head like he's listening to something you can't hear, a muttered reply to no one in the room. The faintest flicker in his expression, like a shadow, passes behind his eyes and then is gone. You're sitting in the Galvin living room on a Sunday afternoon, the television humming with a grainy football broadcast. The boys sprawl across the floor in mismatched socks, the smell of buttered popcorn clinging to the air. At first, it's all normal. Then Don Jr. suddenly stiffens, stands, and walks out without a word. Mimi follows a minute later, her knitting needles clattering onto the arm of her chair. When they return, nothing is said, but the air feels denser. She resumes her seat. He goes back to the floor as if nothing happened. No one else seems to notice. You notice by now there are 8 children in the house, still no daughters. The noise level has shifted from lively to relentless, a constant storm of movement and chatter. But under the surface, there's a rhythm of tension. Certain arguments erupt too quickly. Certain silences last too long. It's 1961. And the field of psychiatry is just beginning to reconsider the causes of severe mental illness. Freudian theories about overbearing mothers and absent fathers are still fashionable, but research into biological causes, particularly genetic ones, is gaining traction. The Galvins have no reason to suspect they are living in what could become the most studied household in the history of American psychiatry. One evening, Jim, the second, comes in from the yard, face flushed, muttering under his breath. He's been in a fistfight with a neighbor boy over a baseball game, but the level of fury doesn't match the cause. He slams his bedroom door, then throws it open again a second later, yelling at someone in the hallway who isn't there. Mimi rushes over, corralling the younger ones into the kitchen. The argument ends. Abruptly, Jim sits on his bed, hands limp at his sides, eyes unfocused. It's not exhaustion. It's something else, something like absence. And then there's John, always the wanderer. He starts leaving at odd hours late at night, before dawn. Once, you catch him on the back steps, barefoot, whispering about needing to get away. From the buzzing, his voice trembles like he's revealing a dangerous secret. You want to ask what buzzing, but the look on his face stops you cold. Mimi's discipline, once so effective, no longer holds its shape. Dawn's presence at home is sporadic, and when he is here, he seems determined to treat the boys as if they're simply high-spirited. He doubles down on sports and chores, hoping structure will correct whatever's wrong. You can almost hear the unspoken belief, this is just a phase. But the word phase feels increasingly flimsy. The kitchen becomes Mimi's command center. From here, she watches, intervenes, and occasionally hides. It's here that she starts jotting notes in a small spiral-bound pad: doctor's appointments, school meetings, and cryptic phrases like odd, today, or kept talking to self. She never shows these notes to Don. Investigators still question whether she was tracking the first map of what would later be recognized as the family's genetic fault line. One afternoon, while she's out with the younger children, you're alone in the house with Don Jr. You hear him in the next room, speaking low and steady. At first you think he's on the phone, but the pauses are wrong, too jagged. When you step closer, the words dissolve into a hiss, half sentences about them and watching. He turns, sees you, and his face smooths into a practiced blankness. Just talking to myself, he says. You nod, but you know it's not true. By the end of the year, a 9th child joins the family, this time, finally, a daughter. The shift in energy is immediate. Mimi clings to her, dresses her in delicate pastels, as if the color itself could ward off whatever is creeping through the older boys. But you sense it won't be enough. Historical accounts note that schizophrenia often emerges in late adolescence. But early warning signs, social withdrawal, odd speech patterns, subtle paranoia can appear years earlier. The Galvin household is beginning to accumulate these signs like storm clouds. They aren't fully visible to the outside world yet, but from inside, you can feel the sky darkening. On a particularly cold night, the power flickers, plunging the house into shadow for a heartbeat before the lights return. For a moment, you see the boys' faces illuminated in that dim, unsteady glow, some curious, some fearful, and one expression that looks disturbingly relieved. You wake to shouting. Not the playful morning chaos you've grown used to in the Galvin house, but a sharp, jagged sound that cuts through the air like splintering glass. It's late 1960s now. Don Jr. is in his late teens, Jim not far behind. The older boys share a room, their voices bouncing off the thin walls in the early light. At first you think it's just brothers fighting over something trivial: clothes, homework, who gets the bathroom first. But then you hear the words, "Don't you dare tell them what I said. What are you talking about?" They're listening, Jim. They know the tension is thick enough to feel in your chest. Mimi bursts in, her robe pulled tight, her voice low but urgent. You can't hear every word, but you catch fragments. "Calm down, it's not real, just eat something." She ushers them downstairs, where the smell of coffee and toast can't mask the sour taste of panic hanging in the kitchen air. Outside, the neighborhood still sees the Galvins as a model family. Don Sr. keeps his lawn tidy. The children attend church, and dinner is served every night at 6. But inside, the fractures are widening. Don Jr.'s paranoia becomes harder to ignore. He accuses siblings of plotting against him, insists on keeping his bedroom window open in winter so they can't trap me with the gas. He spends long hours staring out at the mountains, as if expecting someone or something to emerge from behind them. Meanwhile, Jim begins having episodes of his own. They aren't as explosive as Don Jr.'s, but they're strange in their own way. You'll find him frozen mid-step in the hallway, lips moving soundlessly, eyes darting as though he's following something invisible. Sometimes he seems not to recognize the people around him. The younger boys start to mirror some of this behavior, mimicking voices they hear, repeating phrases without context. Whether it's imitation or the first signs of something deeper, you can't say. Investigators still question whether these early mimicries were innocent childhood play or the first ripples of the same illness. In the broader world, psychiatric research is evolving. In 1967, the American Psychiatric Association is preparing for the next edition of the DSM, the manual that defines mental disorders. Schizophrenia is still poorly understood, and treatments range from heavy sedation to controversial electroconvulsive therapy. In Colorado Springs, though the Galvin's reality is more immediate, living day to day without knowing who might unravel next. One Saturday, John the Wanderer comes home with scratches down his arms. He says he was in the woods behind the house, but there's something in his eyes that makes you think the woods weren't the real story. He spends the evening in silence, rocking in his chair, refusing dinner. Mimi watches from the kitchen doorway, her face a mask of composure. She doesn't push. She's learned that pushing can make the quiet ones lash out. Then there's the cat. It's just a neighborhood stray, a gray thing that had been hanging around the yard for weeks. The younger kids fed it, gave it a name. One morning, it's gone. By afternoon, one of the boys, his shirt sleeves rolled up. Hans tells a story that doesn't quite make sense about having to do it because it was telling on us. Mimi sends the children outside, wipes her hands on a dish towel, and calls Don at work. From that point, you notice her watching the older boys more closely, even as she continues to insist to neighbors that they're just rambunctious. She keeps the house spotless, the table set, the public image intact. But in private, she's started a new spiral-bound notebook. This one not just for appointments and reminders, but for names, dates, and descriptions. It's as if she's building her own private case file. The first doctor visit doesn't bring clarity. The words emotional instability and adjustment issues are thrown around, but no one says schizophrenia yet. The stigma is too heavy, the diagnosis too final. One evening, the sun bleeding out over the Rockies, you stand in the backyard as the boys toss a football. The air smells of pine and the distant taps of someone burning leaves. For a moment, it feels almost normal. Then Don Jr. stops mid-throw, looks directly at you, and says, "You should probably go inside. It's starting." He doesn't explain what it is, and maybe you don't want to know. The diagnosis lands like a slow, heavy snowfall, quiet at first, then relentless. By the early 1970s, there's no denying that something is seriously wrong in the Galvin household. One son diagnosed with schizophrenia could be tragic coincidence. 2 is troubling. But 3, 4, 5, that's a pattern you can't ignore. It begins officially with Don Jr. after several frightening episodes, locking himself in his room for days, accusing his siblings of poisoning his food. He's admitted for psychiatric evaluation. The hospital is a drab, echoing place that smells faintly of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. You visit once, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and see him sitting alone in a plastic chair, muttering to himself. His eyes slide past yours like he's looking at something just behind you. The doctors are careful with their words. They talk about psychotic breaks, about hallucinations and delusional thinking. They explain that schizophrenia often appears in young adulthood, that it's chronic, that there's no coronary management. They mention medication, but also side effects, tremors, sedation, the loss of any spark of joy. When Jim follows his brother into the same diagnosis, it's harder for Mimi to maintain her composure. She still puts on the bright smile for neighbors, still hosts holiday dinners, but you can see the way her hands tremble when she sets down a cup of tea. And then it's John, the wanderer who used to vanish into the cottonwoods, now spends days in bed, refusing to bathe or eat. When he does speak, it's often about the buzzing again, or about messages in the newspaper only he can see. Investigators still question whether this fixation on signals was a personal delusion or part of a shared psychosis among the brothers. By this point, the family's name has begun to circulate in local medical circles. A psychiatrist at the state hospital mentions to a colleague that he has 3 from the same family on his caseload. In the history of psychiatry, such a cluster is virtually unheard of. Colorado Springs continues to boom, oblivious. The neighbors still wave when the younger Galvin kids ride their bikes down Hidden Valley Road. But inside, the house is a pressure cooker. The Wells siblings try to keep their heads down, learning when to stay quiet, when to stay out of a brother's path. The youngest daughter, just a toddler, starts copying the way one of her older brothers paces the hallway. It's harmless mimicry now, but Mimi notices. She notices everything. A 4th son is diagnosed, then a 5th. The statistics are staggering. By the mid-1970s, 6 of the Galvin's 10 sons will be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Researchers would later call it the most remarkable concentration of the illness in one family ever documented. This is the era when deinstitutionalization sweeps across America. Mental hospitals are closing, and families are expected to care for loved ones at home. For the Galvins, that means a revolving door of admissions and discharges, boys leaving in a medicated fog, coming back restless, agitated, sometimes dangerous. There are nights when shouting rattles the windows. Furniture breaks. Once, a plate smashes against the kitchen wall, shards spraying across the linoleum like glittering ice. Mimi sweeps it up without a word. The violence isn't constant, but it's always possible. You feel it in the air though. Where you feel static before a lightning strike. Everyone moves carefully, speaking in measured tones, scanning for signs of escalation. It's not just the outbursts, it's the unpredictability. You might find a brother sitting calmly at the table, sipping coffee, talking about fishing. 10 minutes later, he's accusing the whole family of conspiring against him. The strain begins to bend the family's structure. Don retreats into work even more, taking on extra hours, extra assignments. Mimi, left to manage the household, grows more rigid, her need for order a shield against the chaos. She still refuses to speak publicly about the diagnoses. In the world beyond Hidden Valley Road, psychiatry is finally beginning to look at genetics. Twin studies, family histories, they all point toward hereditary links. But the science is still young, the mechanisms mysterious. For now, the Galvins are living proof that something in DNA can set the mind on a collision course with itself. On a cold night in '74, you stand by the front door as a police cruiser idles in the driveway. Inside, one of the boys sits on the couch, head in his hands, muttering. An officer leans toward Mimi and says quietly, "Ma'am, you need to think about safety for the others." She nods once. She doesn't ask what he means. She already knows. Word travels quietly at first. A nurse at the state hospital mentions the Colorado family with multiple schizophrenic sons. A psychiatrist tells a colleague about the genetic goldmine hidden in plain sight. Soon, the whispers reach the National Institute of Mental Health. You're at the kitchen table when Mimi takes the call. Her tone is polite but guarded, her hand tightening around the phone cord as she listens. The voice on the other end explains they're conducting a long-term study on families with a high incidence of schizophrenia. The Galvins, they say, could help unlock the mystery of the illness for good. In the 1970s, psychiatric genetics is a frontier science. Researchers have long debated nature versus nurture, but the tools to explore DNA directly are still crude. Even so, the Galvin situation is too unusual to ignore. 10 sons, 6 with confirmed schizophrenia diagnoses, all born of the same parents. Statistically, it's astronomical, practically a case study that walked right out of a textbook and into a Colorado neighborhood. The first visit from the research team feels clinical but oddly personal. They set up in the living room with clipboards and tape recorders, asking questions about each child's history, first words, school performance, strange behaviors. Mimi answers carefully, her eyes darting toward the stairs whenever a voice thumps overhead. Don Sr. sits stiffly in his chair, offering short, factual responses. Blood samples are taken, sealed in labeled vials. The researchers explain that they're looking for patterns, markers in the genetic code that might predispose a person to schizophrenia. They speak in cautious optimism, but you can hear the subtext. If the Galvins carry a genetic key, unlocking it could change everything. Not everyone in the family is on board. One of the diagnosed sons refuses to participate, accusing the team of trying to steal my thoughts. Another cooperates, but grows agitated during the cognitive tests, muttering about hidden cameras in the walls. Investigators still question whether the very act of being studied intensified some of the brothers' paranoia. The intrusion of strangers with questions and needles might have felt less like science and more like a conspiracy feeding their delusions. Still, the study moves forward. The team begins compiling a family tree, marking each relative who has shown symptoms. The pattern is chilling: mental illness rippling outward through branches of cousins and uncles, though never with the devastating concentration found in the Galvin household. At night, you overhear Mimi and Don in the kitchen. She wants to know what happens if they find something, if the tests prove the illness is genetic. He says, "Then we know." But his tone suggests knowing might not feel like a victory. The historical parallel is hard to ignore. Just a few decades earlier, eugenics had been a dark stain on American science, with forced sterilizations carried out in the name of improving the gene pool. By the 70s, those practices are condemned. But the shadow of that history still lingers in any conversation about hereditary illness. The Galvins' cooperation with the study is an act of trust, one that could easily have been twisted in another era. Meanwhile, daily life remains volatile. One afternoon, a researcher witnesses an incident firsthand: 2 brothers shouting in the yard, the argument escalating until one swings a shovel. The moment passes without injury, but the tension leaves the visitor pale and shaken. You can see it in their eyes. This is no theoretical case file. This is a house where unpredictability lives in every hallway. The samples are shipped off to labs across the country. Weeks later, the researchers return with more questions, more forms, more tubes for blood. Mimi submits without complaint. She's not doing this for science. She says she's doing it because if there's even a sliver of hope for her children, she'll take it. But as the door closes behind the team, the house exhales into silence. You realize the real experiment isn't happening in a lab. It's happening here every day, as this family tries to hold its shape under the weight of something written in their blood. The visits become routine, though nothing about them feels ordinary. Every few months, you watch the same nondescript government sedan roll up the gravel drive, its tires crunching over stones like an opening drumbeat. To researchers, 3 step out, carrying briefcases, cardboard boxes, and the faint smell of institutional coffee. They aren't just collecting blood anymore. This time, they want hair samples, fingernail clippings, even bits of saliva carefully dripped into sterile vials. You sit at the edge of the kitchen, listening to the faint clink of glass against the tabletop. The brothers are lined up like it's some strange school photo day, each taking a turn while the others mutter about spies and mind readers. A historical note slips into your mind how, in the mid-20th century, psychiatrists leaned heavily on brain scans and post-mortem studies. PET scans are just starting to emerge in the 70s, offering crude glimpses into living brain activity. But for the Galvins, the science feels more invasive. One brother agrees to a spinal tap, then spends days afterward convinced that they drained my memories. Another insists the researchers are implanting tracking devices. The fringe detail, the scientists whisper among themselves, is unsettling. In the Galvin DNA, there might be not one, but several genetic markers, some possibly interacting to heighten the risk of schizophrenia, but no one can prove it yet. The Human Genome Project is still decades away. The tools just aren't sharp enough. Still, every sample they collect might someday tell a story in a language they can't read yet. Investigators still question whether the researchers' presence changed the household dynamic in ways that shaped the illness itself. Was the heightened attention a trigger? Or was it the only lifeline keeping the family from total collapse? Outside of the sterile procedures, life in the house is its own volatile experiment. One day, a younger sibling arrives home from school to find 2 brothers in the living room, arguing over the television remote. In seconds, its spiral's voice is raised, a lamp knocked over, the remote sailing through the air and striking the wall hard enough to leave a dent. You stand in the doorway, the air thick with tension, realizing this is the kind of chaos the researchers will never see on paper. And then there are the quieter moments, the ones that feel almost normal. A shared joke at dinner, Don Sr. working on a fishing reel in the garage, Mimi humming softly as she folds laundry. But the peace never lasts long. It's as if the illness hovers just outside the door, waiting for an opening. In a rare, candid conversation, one of the healthier siblings admits to you that he's terrified of his own mind. "What if it's in me too?" he asks, voice low. It's the question no one wants to say out loud, but everyone thinks about. If 6 brothers can be diagnosed, why not 7, or 8, or 10? When the researchers leave after a week-long observation, they take their samples, their notes, and their theories back east. But they also leave behind something less tangibly deepening awareness that the Galvins aren't just a case study. They're a living reminder that science often studies suffering from a distance. While the people inside the story can't ever step away, the house exhales again into its uneasy rhythm, waiting for the next knock on the door, the next request, for a piece of themselves to be sealed in a vial and sent to a place they'll never see. You don't notice the change at first, it's subtle, like a low hum you can't locate. But then, one evening, it's there in front of you. One of the brothers, usually quiet, starts pacing the length of the hallway. His feet make a steady rhythm on the wood floor, a pendulum swinging faster with each turn. His hands twitch at his sides, fingers curling, uncurling. Mimi tries to coax him into sitting down, offering tea, a slice of bread, a soothing hand on his arm. But the contact makes him recoil, muttering something about poison in the food. It's not anger this time, it's pure, raw suspicion. You realize that trust in this house can evaporate in seconds. Outside, the world is shifting. The late 1970s bring renewed debates about deinstitutionalization, a policy wave that closes many psychiatric hospitals and pushes treatment into communities. In theory, it's progressive. In practice, it means families, like the Galvins, often shoulder the burden alone. You picture similar homes across the country, locked doors, whispered arguments, exhausted parents who don't sleep through the night. The Galvins, though, are more exposed than most. Their reputation in town is a strange blend of sympathy and fear. Neighbors avoid making eye contact at the grocery store. Kids at school whisper about the crazy house by the highway. One fringe detail floats around, never confirmed. A postman allegedly refused to deliver mail after one brother confronted him in the yard, insisting he worked for the CIA. Investigators still question whether the combination of stigma and isolation fed the family's troubles as much as the illness itself. Without outside help or even outside witnesses, the house becomes an echo chamber. You're sitting in the kitchen one afternoon when it happens again. A loud crash upstairs. Don Sr.'s voice shouting, "Stop, put it down." Your legs carry you before your mind catches up. On the second floor, two brothers are in a tug-of-war over a metal pipe, each convinced the other is a threat. You freeze, unsure whether to step in or call for help. The hallway feels narrower, the air thicker, and then, as abruptly as it began, it's over. The pipe clatters to the floor, and both men retreat to separate rooms, slamming doors behind them. You can hear someone breathing hard, maybe them, maybe you, in quieter hours. You find yourself wondering what it's like inside their heads. Is it constant noise, flashing images, or an empty, echoing space where familiar thoughts have been replaced by strangers? You'll never know, and maybe that's the most unnerving part. Late one night, you step out onto the porch to breathe. The stars in the Colorado sky are so sharp they almost hurt to look at. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote calls. For a moment, the house behind you is silent, almost peaceful, but you know better eats not peace. It's just the pause between storms. When you go back inside, you find Mimi at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of cold tea. She doesn't look up when you sit down. "I'm scared they'll take them away," she says finally. You realize she means the state, the hospitals, maybe even the researchers. And she's right to be afraid. Family is the only constant, no matter how dangerous it gets. The next morning, you wake to a smell that doesn't belong: burnt fabric. It leads you to the backyard, where a small pile of charred shirts smolders in a metal trash can. One of the brothers is standing over it, holding a coat hanger like a weapon. His eyes dart between you and the smoke, as if he's deciding whether you're an enemy. "I had to," he says, voice trembling. "They were covered in signals. You don't ask what he means, you're learning that logic doesn't apply here. Instead, you watch the wind scatter ash across the frosted grass, thinking of how quickly possessions vanish in this house. It's not just objects, relationships burn just as easily by now. Doctors have a name for what's stalking the Galvin family: schizophrenia. In the 1980s, the term carries heavy baggage associations with violence, unpredictability, and hopelessness. Public understanding is shallow, shaped by sensational headlines rather than empathy. The family's own experience isn't just medical, it's deeply cultural. They live in a time when neighbors would rather cross the street than ask if you're okay. A fringe detail surfaces in your mind. One Mimi once shared in passing, years ago, a priest told her their suffering might be a test from God. She had nodded politely, but you could see the insult behind her eyes. Tests have answers. This doesn't. Investigators still question whether earlier intervention could have slowed the illness's grip on the brothers. But earlier would have meant the 1960s, before effective medications were common, before the science had even caught up to the language. Back then, most families hid symptoms or sent loved ones away. The Galvins stubbornly kept theirs close to close. Perhaps that afternoon you helped Don Sr. repair a broken window latch. He works quietly, his big hands steady even after decades of handling crises. But then he says something that sticks. Every time I fix one thing, another breaks. You can't tell if he's talking about the house or his family. The day's tension finally cracks during dinner. One brother refuses to eat because he's convinced the mashed potatoes contain tracking devices. Another knocks over his glass, sending water flooding across the table. Mimi rises to grab towels, but the refusal escalates exactions, shouting. The scrape of a chair against linoleum. You find yourself gripping your fork tighter, pulse quickening as if bracing for impact. And then, the strangest thing. One of the younger siblings cracks a joke about the potatoes being government spies, and somehow it diffuses the tension. For a few minutes, the table is alive with genuine smiles. It's a reminder that even here, joy sneaks in like sunlight, through a crack in the curtains. Later, as you step outside to take the trash, the night feels heavier than usual. The wind has picked up, carrying the scent of smoke from somewhere far off. In the distance, the outline of the mountains is a jagged shadow against the faint orange glow of a town you can't quite see. You think about how the Galvins live on, the edge of two worlds, civilization and wilderness, stability and chaos, and how easily they could slip into either. When you return inside, the house is quiet again, but upstairs, faint through the floorboards, you hear the pacing start up, back and forth, like a metronome you can't turn off. You wake before sunrise, the air inside the house colder than you expect. The furnace has gone quiet, and for a moment, you wonder if it's broken or if someone turned it off deliberately. You wrap a sweater tighter around yourself and make your way down the hall, the boards groaning beneath your feet. Halfway to the kitchen, you stop. A door is open that shouldn't be. The oldest boy's room. Inside, the smell hits first in washed clothes, sour breath, a faint trace of something metallic. One brother sits cross-legged on the floor, scribbling on notebook paper with a dull pencil. The light is dim, but you can see he's drawing floor plans, intricate layouts of the house, each labeled with odd notes. Safe corner, watch point, exit B. He glances up at you with a look that doesn't quite register as recognition. They can't hide if I know the routes, he mutters, going back to his work. You back out slowly, the words staying lodged in your chest like splinters by mid-morning. Don Sr. is in the driveway, tinkering with the family's old Ford station wagon. He tells you he's replacing the fan belt, but you can tell his mind is elsewhere. A quiet historical fact floats into your mind. In the 1950s and 60s, Colorado Springs was heavily tied to military expansion, ORAD, the Air Force Academy. This was a place where secrets were normal, where paranoia could feel almost patriotic. Mimi joins you both, handing him coffee. She looks exhausted, but there's a stubborn light in her eyes. If I just keep the routines going, maybe they'll remember what normal feels like, she says. A fringe detail you've picked up. She keeps the same brand of dish soap and laundry detergent she's used since 1962, convinced that any change in scent could throw them off. Investigators still question whether such stability helped or hindered the family. Predictability might have been comfort, or it might have been a cage. The rest of the day unfolds in the kitchen, the heart of the Galvin house. You're shelling peas beside one of the younger sisters when a loud crash echoes from upstairs. Nobody flinches, not even her. She just shrugs and says, "Probably just a door." You realize this is the Galvin equivalent of city dwellers ignoring sirens. Later, you catch a glimpse of a photo album Mimi keeps tucked in a cabinet. Inside are snapshots of fishing trips, Little League games, family picnics, filing faces, frozen in moments that look impossibly peaceful compared to now. One image stops you cold. All 12 children lined up on the front porch, hair neatly combed, eyes shining. The caption in careful handwriting, Summer 63. That night, you hear movement in the attic. You climb the narrow stairs, each step creaking, like a warning. Up there, you find one of the brothers crouched near the rafters, whispering to himself. In the dim light, you see him holding something, a pigeon, trembling in his hands. He looks at you and says, "They tell me where to go." You don't know if he means the birds or the voices. You step back into the hallway, the attic door closing softly behind you. Downstairs, the kitchen light is still on, casting a warm square onto the linoleum. The contrast is almost cruel one. Part of the house pretending to be safe, while another part never stops shifting. Outside, the wind picks up again. The trees scrape against the siding with a sound like fingernails. And somewhere in the distance, a lone dog barks. The night feels alive in a way that makes you pull your sweater tighter. Even inside, you lie in bed later, staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps. They come eventually, slow, deliberate, and just far enough away to make you doubt whether they're real. You wake to the sharp clink of glass in the sink, a sound so small it wouldn't matter anywhere else. But here, in this house, every noise carries weight. You slip out of bed, your socks muffling your steps, and find Mimi at the counter, rinsing out jars. She moves with mechanical precision, like her hands have done this 1,000 times without her mind even needing to be present. She glances over and says, "Can't have clutter. It makes things worse." You're not sure if she means for herself or for them. The morning feels brittle. Sunlight cuts through the thin curtains in harsh stripes, catching dust in the air. You hear the radio in the living room playing local station giving updates on the Vietnam War, its static hum blending with the faint smell of bacon. A historical fact clicks in your mind. By 1970, nearly every American family had been touched in some way by the war, someone serving, someone protesting, someone changed forever. It was a time when uncertainty was the default, and perhaps the Galvin's household mirrored the country more than anyone wanted to admit. In the corner, one brother sits on the couch, wearing 3 coats, even though the heat is on. He keeps muttering about the ones in the trees, rocking slightly. Across from him, another brother flips through a comic book without turning a single page. His eyes dart instead to the door, then the window, then the ceiling. You step outside for air, the crisp Colorado wind biting at your face. The mountains loom in the distance, sharp against the pale sky. A fringe detail surfaces. Don Sr. insisted on weekly fishing trips to 11 Mile Reservoir, long after most of the older boys stopped going. He said it was for tradition, but some believe it was to keep a predictable eye on his sons away from neighbors, away from questions. Investigators still question whether those trips were an attempt at bonding or quiet surveillance. By noon, the house swells with noise. Pots clang, a door slams upstairs, a phone rings without anyone answering. The younger children seem adept at weaving through it, all slipping from room to room like small, silent currents. You notice they keep to the edges of hallways, never passing too close to the boys' doors. You find yourself in the basement, where boxes are stacked against one wall. The air is cool, smelling faintly of oil and damp cardboard. One box, slightly open, reveals a pile of schoolwork math worksheets, short essays, crude drawings. You pick one up, a paper titled "The Perfect House," covered in neat handwriting. The first sentence reads, "No one leaves unless everyone leaves." You put it back, feeling a shiver slide down your spine. Upstairs again, Mimi calls you for lunch. Sandwiches, potato chips, milk in mismatched glasses. She sits down with you, and for a moment, the scene almost feels normal. Then you notice the way her eyes flick to the hallway every few seconds, like she's bracing for an interruption. After the meal, one of the brothers approaches Yukam, polite, his voice low. "They tell me you listen," he says. "That's good. Most people don't listen. They just wait to talk." His words hang there, uncomfortably sharp in their truth. That evening, the house grows quieter, but the quiet is tense, not peaceful. You sit near the window, watching headlights pass on the road beyond the trees. Each one seems to linger longer than the last, as though the drivers are slowing to look. Or maybe it's just your imagination. Later, as you drift toward sleep, you hear the faintest whisper, not from a person, but from somewhere deep in the house's bones. The kind of sound that makes you wonder if buildings can remember. You wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps above you. Not the slow, tired kind. These are uneven, sometimes hurried, sometimes pausing as though the person is deciding their next move. You lie still, eyes open, your body tensed under the blanket. The air feels different tonight, cooler, almost metallic. You glance toward the narrow window, but there's nothing but blackness outside. The kind that swallows the shape of the trees. Somewhere, a floorboard groans under weight that isn't yours. By morning, the tension still clings to the walls. Mimi looks more tired than usual, her hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes. She's at the stove again, flipping pancakes. But you notice her hand trembles just slightly when she reaches for the spatula. She tries to smile, but it doesn't quite land. One of the younger girls passes through, a stack of library books, cradled to her chest. You catch a glimpse of its cover, a faded navy blue with gold lettering. Abnormal Psychology, 1963 edition. She slips upstairs without a word. It's mid-morning when Don Sr. arrives home unexpectedly. His boots hit the floor with a deliberate heaviness, and he hangs his coat without looking at anyone. His voice is calm when he speaks, but it carries the weight of a command. We're doing a drive later, all of us. It's a strange demand, but no one argues. Maybe they've learned that arguing is pointless. Out on the road, you watch the mountains slide by in the distance. The car smells faintly of engine oil and old leather. Historical fact: in the late 1960s, Colorado was experiencing rapid suburban expansion, new neighborhoods, new schools, the kind of growth that made the state seem promising for families. Yet here, in this moving car, the Galvins seem sealed off from that progress, like they're driving through a different decade entirely. The drive leads to an open field, the kind where grass whips in the wind and the sky feels impossibly wide. Don Sr. steps out first, scanning the horizon like he's looking for something only he can see. The brothers fan out, not in a playful way, but in a slow, watchful formation. You stay near the car, the crunch of dry grass under your shoes, the only sound for a moment. A fringe detail drifts in locales, once whispered that Don Sr. would occasionally take his sons rabbit hunting out here, though no one ever saw them return with game. Some thought it was just a way to teach them focus, but others quietly suggested it was a means of isolation, a reminder that their world was smaller than they realized. Investigators still question whether these outings were harmless traditions or subtle rehearsals for something darker. On the way back, the mood shifts. One brother stares out the window, his breath fogging the glass, muttering about the watchers. Another leans forward in his seat, tapping the back of the driver's headrest in a slow, steady rhythm. No one tells him to stop. Back at the house, the day continues in fragments. Someone slams a bedroom door upstairs. The smell of burnt toast drifts from the kitchen. The phone rings twice, but again, no one answers. You begin to feel as though the house itself resists connection to the outside world, swallowing opportunities for communication before they can take root. Late that night, you stand in the hallway, the air thick with the hum of the old refrigerator and the faint ticking of a clock. A shadow passes across the far wall, not from anyone you can see, but from something shifting outside, where the porch light doesn't reach. You stay there for a long moment, listening. The silence deepens, and you're left wondering if the shadow belonged to something, or someone, still out there, waiting. Morning comes with an odd stillness, the kind that makes you question whether the world outside is moving at all. The curtains in the living room sway slightly, though the windows are shut. You notice dust dancing in the slant of light, tiny specks that seem to hang longer than they should before drifting down. Mimi is outside hanging laundry sheets, shirts, towels on the old clothesline, each one snapping in the wind like a quiet metronome. You step onto the porch, the wood cold under your bare feet, and watch her pin the pillowcase with slow, deliberate movements. She doesn't look at you, but she knows you're there. One of the older boys, Brian, emerges from the shed. He's carrying a small wooden box, maybe the size of a shoebox, with a brass latch on the front. He glances toward the house before slipping it under his arm and walking toward the garage. You hear the muffled sound of metal shifting inside something heavier than nails or screws. By the afternoon, the rhythm of the house is interrupted again. A police car crawls past, slow enough for you to see the officer's eyes scan the property. He doesn't stop, doesn't roll down the window, just passes by like he's ticking something off a silent checklist. Historical fact: in the early 1970s, police in Colorado Springs often used these slow patrol passes to read the neighborhood, noting anything unusual without direct engagement. Inside, the atmosphere is taut. The TV hums quietly with a rerun of Columbo, the muted voice of Peter Falk drifting into the corners. One brother, Joseph, is hunched over a chessboard by himself, moving pieces in deliberate, erratic sequences. Every few moves, he whispers to the board. The fringe detail that surfaces today feels stranger than most neighbors once claimed that. On certain evenings, a faint chorus of humming could be heard from the Galvin home. Not music, not words, just low, sustained tones, as if several voices were trying to hold the same note without breaking. Some thought it was prayer. Others suspected it was a symptom of shared, spiraling break from reality. Investigators still question whether this humming was a conscious ritual or unconscious manifestation of something they couldn't control. You find yourself in the upstairs hallway later, drawn by the scent of varnish. One door is slightly ajar, and through the gap you see Don Sr. at a desk, carefully polishing what looks like a rifle stock. His expression isn't angry, just focused, almost serene. He doesn't notice you watching. When the door creaks, he looks up. The pause in his movement is just long enough to register, and then he smiles, faintly, before saying, "Best to stay clear of this, all right?" You nod. The smile never reaches his eyes. That night, the wind kicks up hard, rattling the branches against the roof. Somewhere upstairs, a window bangs open, then slams shut. You start toward the noise, but stop halfway, catching the sound of multiple footsteps retreating quickly, too quick for anyone to be calmly walking away in the dark. The old wood smell of the house mingles with something sharper, gun oil, maybe. You lie awake, listening for that strange humming again. And though you don't hear it, the silence feels just as deliberate. By dawn, you're left wondering if the quiet here is ever truly empty, or if it's simply the space between whatever the Galvins are preparing for next. You wake to a muffled commotion downstairs, voices low, clipped, almost as if they're rehearsing lines for a play they don't want you to hear. The air feels heavier than yesterday, thick with the smell of burnt coffee and something metallic. You follow the sound to the kitchen doorway and stop. Mimi is at the counter, slicing bread with an unusual force, the serrated edge biting deeper than necessary. Beside her, Donald Jr. stands with his hands flat on the table, leaning forward, whispering something that makes her grip the knife tighter. You can't hear the words, but you can see her lips pressed together in that way that means she's swallowing back a reply. Donald Sr. enters from the back porch carrying a folded newspaper under his arm. Without a word, he sets it on the table, taps the headline, and walks away. You catch a glimpse, something about a local veteran arrested after a violent outburst. Historical fact: in post-World War II America, the link between combat trauma and sudden violent behavior was barely acknowledged, and veterans like Don Sr. often lived in communities that avoided confronting the subject entirely. After breakfast, the family disperses in different directions, but the house feels oddly synchronized. The younger boys gather in the living room with a deck of cards, though no one actually plays. One of them, Matt, just keeps shuffling and shuffling, his fingers moving with mechanical precision. Every so often, he stops and stares at a single card before tucking it back in. That's when you hear it again, faint, almost imperceptible. The humming. This time, it's coming from upstairs. You move slowly, your feet avoiding the spots in the floor that creak. The sound grows clearer, and you realize it's layered multiple pitches weaving together. Not in harmony, but in an unsteady, wavering overlap. You push open a door and find Peter sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, his body swaying slightly. Around him are pages torn from a hymn book, arranged in a loose circle. You ask what he's doing. His eyes snap open, and he says, keeping them out, no elaboration, just that fringe detail. A neighbor once swore she saw two of the Galvin boys burying glass jars filled with strange contents in the backyard at night, dark liquid and strips of paper inside. No one ever dug them up, so the truth of that claim remains unverified. Investigators still question whether those jars were symbolic, protective, or simply the product of an unraveling mind. The day winds down with a sharp drop in temperature, the air turning brittle. The Galvins move through their evening routine in near silence. Dinner is eaten quickly, plates clinking just enough to remind you it's not completely mute. As night takes hold, you find yourself standing in the narrow hallway outside the boys' shared bedroom. The door is open just enough for you to see. Silhouettes shifting inside three shapes, moving slowly, as if circling something. You strain your ears but hear only their breathing. Then, a single phrase cuts through the dark, spoken softly but with a weight that stops you cold. Not yet. You don't know if it's meant for you, or if you were never supposed to hear it at all. Either way, you take a step back, careful not to let the floor groan under you, and retreat to your room. Somewhere in the house, the humming starts again, and this time, you realize it's coming from more than one room. You wake in darkness to the distinct sound of something scratching at the wall beside your bed. Not frantic, but deliberate slow strokes, like someone carving a message they don't want erased. You stay still, breathing shallow, the way you do when you want to hear more than be heard. The noise stops, and then, faintly, a whisper. Count to 12. You don't. You keep your eyes open, watching the strip of light under the door. It shifts someone's shadow moving past, then stopping. For a long moment, nothing. Then the shadow disappears, and the house falls into that deep midnight quiet, where every creak sounds like it's in the room with you, in the kitchen the next morning. Mimi sits at the table with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Her eyes look red, but not from crying, more like she hasn't blinked enough. She glances at you and says, almost conversationally, sometimes it skips a generation, sometimes it doesn't. She doesn't explain what it is. Historical fact. By the 1970s, researchers were beginning to suspect a hereditary link in certain mental illnesses, but public discourse around genetics and psychiatry was still in its infancy. Families, like the Galvins, already under social and economic pressure, often found themselves serving as unintentional case studies. In the afternoon, you find yourself in the backyard. The winter sun is weak, painting everything in washed-out colors. One of the younger boys, Joe, is digging in the frozen earth with a rusted spade. You watch him for a while before asking what he's doing. He doesn't look up when he answers. Making room, fringe detail. Decades later, construction workers claimed they unearthed small glass bottles in the soil near the old Galvin home, some containing scraps of writing too faded to read. Whether these were connected to the jar's neighbors spoke of remains unknown. Investigators still question whether these were remnants of private rituals, psychiatric coping mechanisms, or something entirely unrelated to the family's struggles. That night, you hear a sudden crash, a door slamming somewhere upstairs. Footsteps follow, fast and heavy, then a yell that cuts short, swallowed by silence. You hesitate in the hallway, unsure if moving toward the sound will make things better or worse. Then, from the darkness ahead, a figure steps into the faint glow spilling from a bedroom. It's Donald Jr. His eyes are fixed on something behind you, and for a moment you think you see the faintest smile twitch at the corner of his mouth. He says your name not loudly, but enough to make your chest tighten. "Come see," he whispers. You take one step, then another. The room you enter is almost bare, save for a single chair in the center, facing the wall. On the seat lies an old family photograph, everyone smiling, frozen in time. But someone has taken a marker to it, blacking out faces, leaving only 3 untouched. When you glance up, Donald Jr. is gone. The photograph remains. And somewhere in the house, that slow, unsteady humming starts again, filling the space like a second heartbeat. The air in the Galvin house seems lighter now, though you know that's only a trick of perception. The truth is, some houses never let go of what they've absorbed. Sounds, whispers, glances that carried more than they revealed. You can walk away from them, put miles between yourself and their peeling walls, but pieces of them tend to follow. You think about Mimi, who carried her family's weight in silence, and Don Sr., whose life was both provider and unacknowledged experiment. You think about the boys, their laughter in better moments, their strange games, their rituals that may have been desperate attempts at control. You think about how the line between fear and love can be thin enough to vanish. Outside, the wind has settled. The world is still. You realize your own breathing has slowed to match the rhythm of the quiet. Every detail of the house, from its warped floorboards to its faint, persistent hum, feels sharper now that you're not inside it. But the sharper the memory, the more it softens around the edge, is like a photograph you've looked at too many times in another life. Maybe this family would have been just another story of mid-century America, hard-working father, a devoted mother, a dozen children filling the house with noise. Instead, they became something else entirely, a mystery woven from both science and sorrow, still studied, still debated, still unanswered. And as you let the last echoes fade, you know some mysteries don't need solving to leave their mark.